Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Puglisi. I'm the Curator of Education for Youth and Adult Programs at the Neuberger Museum of Art. And I'm really excited to welcome Richard, Ina, and Scott today for our In Conversation series that is so wonderfully supported by the Daniel P. Paduano and Janet W. Prindle Lecture Series at the Neuberger Museum of Art. First, I'm going to introduce them with their bios, and then we'll get into the conversation. Richard Mayhew is a landscape painter and arts educator, born in 1924 and raised in Amityville, New York, on Long Island's South Shore. Richard Mayhew's passion for painting was sparked by watching the artists who summered in the environs of Amityville and painted its scenic shoreline. Inspired by these artists, young Mayhew used brushes and paints from his father's sign painting business to copy what artists were doing. For Richard, the essence of reality is more important than its facts. His landscape paintings aren't the facts of a landscape, but the spirit of a landscape. That spirit shimmers through a haze saturated with color. He's had more than 40 solo exhibitions and taught for nearly 30 years. He has been a tireless arts advocate and activist, a member of the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition and Spiral Group. He has taught at the Brooklyn Museum, the Art Students League, Smith College, Hunter College, Pratt Institute, San Jose State, and Pennsylvania State University, where he retired as Professor Emeritus in 1991 after 14 years of teaching at the school. During his Penn State years, Mayhew traveled across America. He was deeply affected by color, shapes, drama, and spirituality of the American West. Upon his retirement from teaching, Richard Mayhew moved to Santa Cruz, California, where he resides with his wife and continues to paint. In addition to the Whitney and Ford grants, Richard Mayhew has been the recipient of several honors and awards, including the Ingram Merrill Foundation Award, Tibney Foundation Award, a National Institute of Art and Letters grant, the Child Hassam Purchase Award, and the National Academy of Design Merit Award, and the Grumbacher Gold Medal. His work is represented in major collections, including the Whitney Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the De Young Museum, among others. Next, Scott Mayhew. Scott Mayhew has devoted more than 20 years to brand and communication design and development for Fortune 500 companies, mid-size startups, and global non-for-profit organizations. His work includes online print, package design, and environmental design across a broad range of clients. He enjoys working across multiple projects and teams of designers, writers, marketers, and developers, including his sister, Ina. Next, Ina Mayhew. Design Tech, is a native New Yorker who has designed more than 25 feature films, a dozen television shows, numerous commercials, music videos, a movie musical, and permanent studio backlot. Along the way, she has worked with notable directors and producers such as Spike Lee and Malcolm Lee, Ava DuVernay, Tyler Perry, Debbie Allen, and most recently, Liesl Tommy. Ina has designed for Netflix, Warner Brothers, MGM, Lionsgate, New Line, 40 Acres, and a Mule, BET, HBO, MTV, Universal, PBS, and Island Pictures. She is currently in Greece filming a feature for Disney, having completed the feature film Respect, starring Jennifer Hudson as Aretha Franklin in 2020. Prior to that, she did the Netflix film Christmas on the Square for Dolly Parton, directed by Debbie Allen. Previously, she designed 3 seasons of the award-winning TV show Queen Sugar, with Ava DuVernay as its executive producer. Her credits including Girl 6 and Get on the Bus, Diary of a Mad Black Woman, Medea's Family Reunion, Above the Rim, 200 Cigarettes, and Sidewalk Stories, with Purchase College classmate Charles Lane as its director. Ina is the daughter of the renowned landscape painter Richard Mayhew. Her mother, Dorothy, was also an artist in many mediums: watercolor, etchings, and ceramic design. She often collaborates with her brother, Scott, who has served as a graphic designer on a majority of her films and TV shows. Ina Mayhew is a graduate of SUNY Purchase College, where she studied fine art, later transitioning to focus in theater set and costume design. She currently teaches a seminar in production design at Purchase College for the Department of Theater Design and Technology. Join me in welcoming Richard, Ina, and so we're going to start the conversation today with Ina and Scott, and I have some questions for you. So what was your childhood like growing up surrounded by artists, activists? What memories do you have, and what artists were you growing up around?
It seemed normal. And it's only in hindsight that it's extraordinary, because they would just come over, be Romy Bearden and Norman Lewis and Cal Douglas, and it goes on and on, Reggie Gammon and Fell Hines. We were just always around them, and between the openings and then there are sort of impromptu casual gatherings at our house up in New City in Rockland County. Mom would serve the wonderful food, and they would just arrive, and then the opening, standing around there as little kids. There weren't very many other kids around. It was kind of us. That Benny Andrews, his kids were around, right? That's in hindsight, it's oh my goodness, but going fishing, playing tennis,
playing badminton in the backyard. Reggie Gammon,
with Reggie.
He was kind of our documentary photographer, and we have so many photos of our family from him when he'd come and visit us very often. And I think we were both really drawn to the conversation and kind of this, I don't know, we didn't know any better that it was great energy, but just loved listening to people talk about art and politics and their day-to-day. And it was just so incredibly fascinating that we hung around the adults, as a bunch of little kids, and we never left. It was just, I think we learned so much by just the conversation and their company. And they were so generous to us too. They always kind of included us. And to this day, have always remembered us and talked to us like we're still children. But it was really wonderful being around all of that. And I definitely think that it encouraged us to go into the arts, because it was, it seemed so positive, and it was something. Why wouldn't we want to go into a world where this was the people that we were surrounded by?
Reggie completely inspired me into photography. Reggie, with his beautiful Nikon cameras and the way he would click through and then shoot, I just listened to his camera, and that's what I built a darkroom because of Reggie. Learned how to process film. By the time I got to Purchase, I had a darkroom and was shooting since I was 14. So that darkroom at Purchase, to see all those Omega D5s, was like, oh my God, this is heaven. And I could really print because of Reggie.
Yeah, and I think in a similar relationship, when my father would take me to meet these people at opera, behind the scenes at the Met, or Woody King Jr., who was a big influence and one of the first people that actually hired me as a set designer, to be honest. And so, between, I think our mother, when I was really influenced by all the visits to theater and watching movies with her, and her time taking us around, and that really stuck with me.
Yes, all the museums.
All the museums. Yeah.
I'm sorry. She would kind of run us through museums, knowing, we were kids, just walk us through, we're just walking through the Met. We just walked through you know, because she knew that, and it would just go in. She was persistent like that. You know?
Yeah, and just being constantly encouraged by the people who came to the house and loved that we were in the arts. We both drew, we both did some paintings, like Scott said, he was taking photos, you know, so that there was always this positive enforcement constantly. So there was, of course, we were going to go into the arts somehow. And I just love theater and film. So, and that's probably why I kind of went in that direction. But I started as a painter as well, going to
I
purchase.
remember in one of our conversations, we were having this conversation and talking about your memories. And I remember Richard, you said that actually Scott and Ina influenced you, that you were so humbled by how much you had influenced them. Can you talk a little bit about how they influenced you as children?
It was a joy because, well, now after all these years, the fact that they were involved with the applied arts, and I was involved with the spiritual sensitivity of the arts, they really would constantly, when I forget what is happening, that they, the spirit of the two of them really kept me going. And through the years, we kind of melted together in terms of the inventive, creative continuation of functioning. And when the children were around, when all those artists used to come to the house, they weren't like kids playing separately somewhere else. They were in the mix with these artists, which was very enjoyable. But now I feel how much the fact that they were influencing me in terms of my continuation of creative sensibility.
Can you talk a little bit too about Spiral Group in New York? And I remember you talking about how it challenged the system and about the ideas that Spiral Group had. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, before I go into that, you're talking about being a landscape fan. I'm a mindscape fan.
A mindscape.
Yeah, and spiritual sensitivity. Now, the Spiral was a group of artists. After I studied in Europe and I came back to the United States, I met Felworth Hines. And Felworth Hines was one of the organizers of Spiral. And he taken me to meet the elders. Mm-hmm. These were the most prominent Afro-American artists in the United States. At that time, I still feel they still are in that category. And I met with them. I didn't know them personally before I met them. And so there was a kind of a joyful encounter. And with Romeo Bearden, Hale Woodruff, and Charles Austin, Norman Lewis, which is when this spiritual artist, which influenced a lot, internalized creative expression. So meeting that group was such a joyful inspiration after coming from Europe and seeing what was going on with Spiral. Yes, right. Spiral was part of a movement going on across the United States, which was because part of Spiral was saying, not Norman Lewis, but coming from Indiana was a surprise, because part of this group, Norman Lewis and Romeo Bearden, came out of the Harlem Renaissance group. But there was this group coming from Indiana, which was Hale Woodruff, Felworth Hines, and two other artists that it came from central part of Indiana, which is surprising because what was going on in the movement when Spiral was coming together was a development in Chicago and in Missouri and in Los Angeles and in Atlanta, and in parts of Boston, and also in Maryland, all at the same time. So Spiral was the spiraling group extended around the United States. It was a very inspirational time, and a challenge also, the fact of how much African artists were denied a greater respect and representation. But also in the 60s, which was being acknowledged at the time, no women was accepted and respected in the arts in the 1960s. So that was part of another minority situation other than Afro-American artists.
Thank you. And also, when we spoke, you all mentioned that your family was really involved with the Rockland Center for Arts, and that how you guys influenced that community so deeply with the arts. What did you do with the center, and can you talk about the artist outreach program that inspired so many artists in the community?
My father and mother were both involved in Rockland Center for the Arts, and became a part of this outreach to one of the communities, which was in Hillburn in particular. I remember that one well, where we kind of, we ended up building an art center, which was a geodesic dome. And it was not only a family affair, it was the whole community came together.
And I fell off that building it, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott. But that was just one. I mean, there were many exhibitions at Rockland Center, and there was a really, really interesting community in Rockland County that was a mix of a very diverse community of Native American, Black Americans, Dutch, and that was what the community was in particular. But just overall, Rockland County was really interesting and diverse, and that was one of the things. And he can talk about it a little bit more about Rockland Center and teaching and putting together exhibitions.
But that was the Helen Hayes Foundation, part of Rockland Center for the Arts, which Scott and Nina participated very strongly in terms of building an extended program in in terms of a community outside of New York City, upstate New York, isolated, let's say, a small community, which the Helen Hayes Foundation, Rockland Center for the Arts, and Scott and Nina were really involved with helping develop a program that was taking place in the upper country area.
And I don't know that we were aware of, when we moved up to Rockland County from New York City, the road, South Mountain Road that we were on, was this extraordinarily populated group, Lotte Lenya and Kurt Weill and John Houseman, right? And it goes on and on. All these people lived there, like right down the road from us. And that was something I think we just kind of happened on. Our mom put an ad in the paper, wanted a house with an acre of land, a babbling brook stocked with trout in the Times. And people called and said, "We have your house." And it's this beautiful house on South Mountain Road. And that was, that's sort of how we became involved in this community. I don't think we intended to do that, but it became this wonderful place. Chock full of people.
It was a really great place to, you don't always think of Rockland County in particular as a center for artists, but it really was. There were many writers and actors and a lot of artists, painters that lived there. I think a lot because it was a bit out of the city and a little bit of a retreat. And so everyone kind of came together at the center, and then having my father part of it really, I think, helped a lot, brought new energy, brought new interest of people who want to get more involved, and realize that there is artists and actors and writers everywhere that should be celebrated. And so it really was a great place to go. I'm sorry?
Tony Morrison was our neighbor, and actually the children associated with her, which was also very good. So that upper area at that time, all the arts were in Rockland County area, which was surprising away from New York City, that this is where they all came together up there. So there was an escape from the city, but it's involved with the unique sensibility of the area, because the street that we lived on, South Mountain Road, a lot of the artists and writers lived on South Mountain Road, and which we didn't know that when we moved up there.
I will say that the high school that we went to, which was Clarkstown High School North, which sounds like a very, just another high school, but it was so rich in arts. Like, I had the best art teachers, and it's really where I started to get involved in theater. When I saw them setting up a play, that was it that kind of drew me in. And I started, and pretty much I did mostly art and theater in high school, maybe some academic classes, but they were so generous to both Scott and I. I mean, Scott worked with me too. I mean, it was the two of us that did so much together. And that started my interest in designing scenery. And also, there was not a lot of women, which seems odd, but who were that interested and really wanted to become set designers. That was the beginning, and that's how actually I got to Purchase, was really from the work that I did in high school, both theater and painting and drawing.
Yeah, I know everyone here in some kind of way has a Purchase College connection. Do we want to go into that a little bit right now? And then we can pivot the conversation to start talking about you and Scott's collaborations, and also about, Richard, I know you're so passionate about your interdisciplinary approach to teaching too. So we can talk about how each of you were involved in ways at Purchase, and then we'll pivot.
I remember when I was there in the visual arts department, there was an interdisciplinary lecture, which was given by my father there. And it was the coming together. And at the time, Purchase was really much into bringing dance and music and visual arts and theater together. So we kind of had a collaborative moment at Purchase with my father. And it was actually with a friend of mine, was Fred Wilson, was also involved, who was someone who was there when I was there. And then, yeah, I can't remember exactly when Scott came to Purchase, if it was while I was there or after, but we all had a lot of friends in common.
Yeah. I went later, and it was another crowd. I studied photo under Jed Devine, who was so inspirational, and but I was friends with all those actors, the Stan Tucci's and Wesley's, and those guys were there when I was there. I think just after you.
Right, we kind of overlapped, and so all of those people who were there as students with us have kind of obviously blossomed into their own careers as actors and filmmakers, like Charles. And but it was a really great community, and that's why my father wanted to come there, because it was the beginning of something that was the same kind of spirit that he wanted to do, with all the arts coming together and celebrating together and performances and all of that. So I don't know if you remember that, Dad, when you were at Purchase with me. It was a long time ago, and it was just a moment. But anyway, that's kind of the connection of the three of us.
It was just, it was such a, the facility, when I went there for photo, because I decided, okay, I'm gonna study photo formally. It was so great. I mean, the equipment, everything was, the students, you know, my colleagues or other fellow students, I mean, they were great for Regina Deloise and Jed Devine and Victor Schrager and Jan Gruber. I mean, they were so amazing as teachers and also friends and colleagues. I don't know that I could have happened on a better moment. I mean, just walking, like I said, walking into the dark room, or just taking out equipment. I could get that lens. What? That's a $3,000 lens, and it was like, here. It was great for me in that quick time, because I already started a business, so you know I was running back and forth. But yeah, it was really something.
Yeah, I mean, right. It was. That's what we loved about it.
Yeah.
Was that all of us were there together. You know, photographers and the painters and dancers. You know, I remember being a really big part of you know, the lighting design with the dance department, and one of my and a lot of the teachers were my first jobs when I got out of school, as well as my all the people all my classmates as well. So we just continued this great relationship, and from a school of that I just always wanted to go to. I actually only wanted to go to Purchase because it just had all these wonderful opportunities. You know, oh, I could go paint, I could be in theater, I can do so many different things, like having all the arts around kind of duplicating our life, you know. So it was a great place, you know.
Well, absolutely right. It was idyllic. It was Nelson Rockefeller's idea to have an Ivy League level as a state school, and it drew in these professors from Harvard and Yale and et cetera, because that ideal is idyllic. It is what it's supposed to be. And so they just didn't hold, you know, with the dance, the opera house, the sprung floor, it just from a theatrical and production side, facility was amazing.
Yeah, there's the openness to kind of work across departments and interdisciplinary. Richard, I know you're known for creating and bringing an interdisciplinary study approach to your teaching, and you're kind of the inventor or revolutionary of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about your ideas around interdisciplinary teaching?
Well, I was, you know, before I went to Europe, I know I had the experience of what was going on at Purchase. Now, Purchase was interdisciplinary program. That's really what it was. But how much I didn't emphasize that this was interdisciplinary study. But Purchase was part of that combination of inventive creative conscious beyond the norm, or beyond whatever discipline one was studying. And Purchase was part of a program structured that way in the arts and sciences. So, but when I went to Europe, I found that Europe was involved in academia as interdisciplinary study, because their art was not taught in the university. It was taught at an academy separate from the university. Where the United States was doing it, but you had to realize what was going on in university was interdisciplinary study. Even though the arts were not taught at the university, they're involved with the extension of inventive consciousness of that discipline that they're working with, which would go beyond the norm of what they're studying or what they learned. They would have to go ahead in terms of the extension of the concept. And so when I came back, I came back and with that kind of sensitivity of interdisciplinary study. And when I started teaching, I was teaching at actually the art academies. But when I started teaching in universities such as at Hunter College, I wanted to introduce interdisciplinary study. Now, academia was not ready for that in the early years. And it was upsetting the apple cart, let's say, of education process at Hunter. So I left and I went to study, to teach at San Jose State. And I started teaching interdisciplinary study using all forms of theater and dance and music in terms of scientific experimentation. And I taught at, let's see, Sonoma State and Hayward State, and then at San Jose State, always trying to apply interdisciplinary study. They didn't realize what I was doing. So they was kind of, okay. So when I went to Penn State, they was ready for this but what happens in academia, they don't know where to put it. Because when I was starting, I went to Penn State and they accepted the idea. I came there as full professor and tenured to university because I was involved with this new concept and actually applied it for a while there, but no one put interdisciplinary study. And I was doing it out of the art department when I went there. And then what category would they put this? Was it a new department or another part of the university? And so that was a problem, the limitation of actually applying interdisciplinary study long-term at Penn State, because the schematic category would be a program of its own. Now, across the United States, at University of California, Santa Cruz has its own interdisciplinary study area, and how much other universities have applied that instead of coming out of a particular discipline of maybe out of science or out of English department or out of one of the departments. It has its own established department, and that didn't exist when I was doing it. So when I did it at Penn State, it was like the first time that this kind of program was applied. And they wanted to know what books did I was learning this from. I was doing it very intuitively because there was no particular books written on it in detail that I could get a hold of for the extension of this thinking. Well, I'm actually not thinking about this. Really started when I was a little boy and I didn't realize it. Apollo magazine was like an interdisciplinary magazine of science and antiques and the arts. And I didn't realize it when I was so young when I had Apollo magazine. I was looking at the pictures rather than reading it because I was too young to really understand that until later. I found out that magazine was involved with an interdisciplinary approach to education. And what happens, I used to look at it as a little boy. Apollo magazine in 1965, I think it's 1965, they wrote an article about me, which is very shocking. There's a little boy that would read that magazine when he was a little boy, just looking at the pictures. All of a sudden now, they did an article about my art in terms of interdisciplinary study, but this was later, right? And I've been trying to find that article again, that was written at that time about my work. Interdisciplinary study is really academia. It's a natural form of education. It's one involved in science or business or whatever a discipline. How do you carry it beyond the norm to the next stage or to something that you could not learn that you applied beyond the concept of structure of that discipline? So when I was doing it at Penn State, that was the first time I get maybe some universities involved with industry study, but it didn't last because they had nowhere to, what department to put it in. So it was kind of stopped there, right? But it has now, many of the universities around the United States now have industry study programs. And
it's become popular.
Not the way that I thought about it at the time. The way it is now, it's evolving beyond the norm of industry study, which I saw was going on in Europe in the education programs. So when I came back to use this, I was an alien. I wasn't ready for it.
The schools weren't ready for it, but you were ready. You paved the way.
Scott and Ina was involved with the extension of what they were doing very early on. And it's how much Scott was an excellent photographer, as well as he was involved with graphic design. But what he was doing was a little beyond what the norm of that particular area. And Ina was so inventive in what she was doing. She'd take a little bit of nothing, a piece of paper or something, or cloth, or and a paintbrush, and make something out of it. I said, "Oh my goodness, look at this!" And so I was learning about industry study right from the basic elements, and how I started teaching it. And now there's books written on industry study. I couldn't get a hold of a book when I was doing it, so I was very intuitively doing it in the early years without the structure, so-called, that define it as a legitimate form of education.
Yeah, you were putting it into practice. You were
I'm
creating.
sorry.
You were. There were no books because you were creating it. You were putting the work that you believed in into practice and seeing how it functioned in the classroom. Really interesting.
Well, now I went up to the University of California here to see their program on it. There's books on industry study, and also their approach is quite different from me. Mine was very intuitive. In some ways, doing it very intuitively, the fact that there was no structural guidelines, you have to do it this way. Mine was a little more open about it. So I hope if maybe that's was very good, maybe not too bad. But I saw Ina and Scott doing this, whatever they were doing as a graphic designer, such as Scott, and was combining his photography background and structure, and being very inventive about it, and using it as a facades and so forth. And then Ina, how much when she's working with scrims as a background of the theater, using opaque scrim as opposed to transparent scrim, which creates a difference where light penetrates the transparent skin as opposed to an opaque area which blocks the light and color coming through. So she was doing that with scrims in the theater, which was fantastic. So when, as I said, I was seeing both of them was so inspirational. I was like, where did they learn this from? Where did they get it from? But they were doing it as a natural form of extension of the creative concept.
Which is a perfect lead-in to Ina and Scott talking about how you collaborate and how your practices really are interdisciplinary and crossover. So maybe subconsciously or consciously, you were being influenced by these different all of you influenced by one another.
I mean,
Well,
yeah, I think we did start, like I said, in theater, but as a photographer, Scott did a lot of fashion for magazines in New York City, and but on a scale that was kind of a 2 to 3 person enterprise for a little while, which was really kind of fun, where he would be the photographer and I would kind of put together the scenery and bring the clothing for the models. It's really great time together. And I think that was, it just evolved. And I think, Scott, maybe why don't you just talk about this particular part of For Color Girls that I did with Tyler Perry.
Yeah.
Theater play, but he had, I think one thing that Tyler let us do was kind of be inventive. And this is one of the things that Scott took some of his background and created all of this art for this.
Yeah, that was funny because the character that Janet Jackson played is a publisher, right? And for this magazine, and me being creative director and covers and shooting covers, but then also designing covers, this was like Nina said, I don't like 20 covers we need, I don't know. And so
yeah, I mean, Scott does it with ease. I think that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, so putting these, to create that, and I guess Tyler was very happy with it. But it's funny because I jumping back and forth working with Ina on projects, and then switching over to identity work or corporate identity work or communication or change, with these large entities like foundations like Legal Defense Fund or startup companies or big restaurants. It switches over to, there's a fictitious magazine now that this person, Janet Jackson, is playing, or et cetera. And so it kind of moves into this, okay, so this is a pretend version of what I do over here in the quote unquote real world. But it's a funny thing. But yes, so
that's so interesting.
Ever since high school, we've done this stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And I shot for years, and seeing these art directors at these magazines like over at Conde National, it's like, but I want to do more of it. They would think of these concepts and they hire the photographer to shoot it, and you're the shooter. And so I was like, so I then moved over to start a company where I did that. And so then we could all do all these things together. And that's where like the Spike Lee thing came up.
And if you want me to flip to next slide too, just please let me know where.
So this is just some of the locations and sets from For Color Girls, just as a particular moment, a build set. So there's, barbershop, again, one of the things that I always lean on Scott for is he just has this instinct of, I'm going to say, kind of the two-dimensional design world that is so important to the film. We need identity, and since he already comes from that, but he also helps me do mural work. So he helped me kind of do this barbershop mural that you see outside all the windows. This is barbershop in the cut, which is the third one. And so no matter what show, he kind of takes what he's done in the past and always puts all of it into each project. And so everything always looks different. And, so no matter what, I always need his eye and his design skill to help say certain things about each of the shows. Now, go ahead.
This is great. So this is, Ina's doing Spike Lee, she's doing Clockers, right? Big, thing. Harvey Keitel, blah, blah, blah. And she would call and say, okay, Spike wants he wants a lunchbox with a 45 caliber gun in it and an apple. and it's a man. I think it's going to be something like it's going to be no more packing. I think that's what it is. Like, well, I'm on the phone. How big? She goes, I don't know, like 50 feet. I'm like, what? So I had to, go out, find a gun, find an apple, and photograph it. I'll never forget that piece. I don't know what year that is. It's like 93, 94.
Yeah.
And instead of Yoo-hoo, we made Chocolate Move. These things we just make up. It's very funny to do. It's like, really, in the bombed malt liquor that he's holding there. It's hysterical that we're making up these fictitious major products that are based on products, and then they show up, and it's on the floor of the loft in Tribeca or in Soho, and it's like, yeah, that's it. Okay, let's go.
I mean, it's the world that I always loved, which was not the world of reality, but the storytelling. That's what I loved about theater and film. And it was so great to have Scott help me collaborate, because on Clockers, I was one of the art directors, and that was my responsibility, was all of the packaging and billboards. And it was such a compliment that Spike really loved it so much that he made it a centerpiece, one of the centerpieces of the film. And so through all of my collaborations with people, the Tyler Perry world, the Spike Lee world, one of the producers I worked with was Paul Garnes, who brought me onto the show Queen Sugar. It's like we all have this family that continues on from project to project, and it's been, of course, wonderful to work with Ava DuVernay. And again, you'll see some of our work Scott and I did together on Queen Sugar, which shoots in New Orleans. And so I had to create a sugar mill in our warehouse. Just a really quick summary about most sugar mills are kind of in warehouses, so it's something we had to build. And then Scott had to come up with the identity of the sugar mill logo, and again, using all of his corporate kind of influence, and always kind of comes up with the correct sign and identity. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of this really contemporary kind of sign in this very rustic world, but that was part of the character development. And there's so much that goes on in this television show that's so important. And so this character, who's also a very important part of the show, writes this book, and so Scott developed the design.
Yeah, it's interesting that these characters, from behind the scenes, which I'm sort of outside of the industry in a little in a way. So all these characters, this one, the Nova character and the Charlie character, they all have these details that they're really these small, like, oh, she wrote a book, and so then we need this book cover, and we need the feeling of who she is and what her portrait is like, and how all those things that are so, they come and go in 2 seconds on screen, and they're really quick, and some are important and some are just kind of filling in, but they're really detailed. It's really deep, and it takes a lot of time to like get all that just right. This one's kind of country. This one's really sophisticated. Oh, she went to an Ivy League, and she's frustrated with her son, who's really this hipster, and he's dealing with, all those little things, like down to the iPhone interface, like I'm doing all the posts, and the way that they deal with their phone, and do they have an iPhone or do they have a Samsung phone, and all those. It's amazing the amount of stuff that is taken so for granted, that goes by so quickly, and takes a huge, there's hundreds of people.
That's fascinating. It's like the nuance to tell the story, like these small little hints to give you a little look into the character's identity.
Yeah, is it always a too yellow? no, I think that's a little too much. You know, so man, maybe you need a border. You know, I know. You know. Anyway.
So to carry on, like you said about the character of Charlie, oh, my dad's painting was in that. That was the whole thing of that particular. So I always put his artwork in everything I do. So his work perfectly to her world.
Yeah, legal clearance is a big deal.
Oh yes, so that it helps. But also, you know, everyone, first of all, admires my father. And I love when you get comments going, wait, is that a Richard Mayhew? So that's always fun. Even he goes, I think I saw your painting in Queen Sugar. So I like to, you know.
Yeah.
We have we have about 9 minutes left, and I do want to leave some time for questions. So if anyone has questions, please put them into the chat so that we can bring those up. But I don't want to disrupt the conversation you were having because it's amazing. I love that you put his work into your film work. That's great.
This is something else Scott designed, this packaging for, you know, one of the very important characters. Like you said, everything has a meaning and a backstory, and it pushes all the characters forward, you know. So we say graphic design, but it more and more has become a very integral part of film and television these days. But
well,
yeah, going.
It is. Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't get enough images in there. You know, really, a lot of the you know what I do in the outside work, you know, is identity work and brand, like the legal defense. Like, what is the definition of this entity? And they call it logo, or they call it graphic design, or they call it fonts. And it's really, what is this identity? And it's very much this, like she owns a restaurant and she's this person. So it's this whole thing, which is very much the same identity work. And it involves graphic design, it involves color, it involves space. So it, you know, blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yes, no, you need to say so. Early in my career, I designed the movie Above the Rim, all about basketball, and the Rucker Courts, which is a very famous place of competition and a lot of illegal betting. And anyway,
this is fascinating. This is a little movie, right? And this shirt has become a huge fashion thing today. We made this movie when? In 93? 93. This shootout shirt has been ripped off, by the way. And
I've seen it. I have seen it.
Yeah.
In the world.
So, but you see the power of something, yeah. Right? You know, it just has this new life.
Very funny.
Yeah.
So I figured I'd put it there. It's like, excuse me, you're making $50 a shirt?
Well, you know.
Anyway, God bless. I just put that in there just to give you an idea of the work that I do. You know, like there's products like the consumer beauty things, but then Myelin, a public piece. Sushi Samba is a huge restaurant globally, total startup. Things like the Legal Defense Fund, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Thurgood Marshall. That was interesting, because they were the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, but the Legal Defense Fund, Thurgood Marshall, started as a different entity, and it took years to convince them to just take on LDF, which is what the brand is now. And that was a big thing to understand that, wait a second, NAACP is not the same thing as LDF. And they said, no, we go around saving lives, which is different than, this is what Thurgood Marshall did, you know, the Voting Rights Act and all the things that are really current. And so things like changing the identity to this and et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a little window in. Rockefeller is another one. Gates is another one. Each one they end up being visual things, but they're all identities of what that entity may be, whether it's consumer side or public service.
I'm going to stop the share. So what's going to happen is it might jump, just letting you know.
Okay.
So we have a question that is for everyone. What is your hope for the future of the arts? That's a big question.
You know, it really is, especially in this past year of all of our kind of need for some joy and happiness. I think that the first place you reach out is to the arts, to watching a television show, to seeing museum presentations online, to, you know, I think that it really, really showed how much we really need it, how much it uplifts our spirits, and no matter how tough projects are to produce, in the end, we all have such a satisfaction. And I think that that's what encourages everybody to want to be an artist or a painter or a writer or a designer. You know, I think that we have joy doing it, and we like that the audience or the public also enjoys it, you know.
Yeah, you know, Mom said this, and I think that, you know, I don't even think there's need for hope, because the artist, she would say, is the one that persists, irrespective of anything around. They make the hipsters. You go to Brooklyn, and the Williamsburg was just warehouses. Now it's the hip place. The artist does that. You almost don't need hope, because the artist is going to prevail and make something out of absolutely nothing, out of whole cloth, and make it really cool. I just need a piece of paper and some paint, or this room is fine. We'll work here and make it fabulous. You know, the artists are strong entities, people. So whoever asked,
we bring the fun and the culture.
That too.
Yeah.
Well, the future of art is how much one's involved with that special inventive consciousness. And this is what I taught all the time, was on the basis of a craft, in terms of how to put a painting together, or a sculpture, or a ceramic piece. It's the mindset in terms of the inventive consciousness. And this is what I tried to put. How do you teach that? And had to do with the elements of the creative structure itself. Someone says, what is the most sensitive thing there could be? Well, I wouldn't say, but one of the poets said that a dewdrop on a leaf early morning. And I said, well, how would one paint that? They would paint a green leaf with a circular ball of a drop coming on it. What does that count? But if one is able to, using that as an example, is paint the sensitivity of that. What is the sensitivity in the pure moment of that happening? What does it look like? What color is it? What shape is it? So this is what I've been trying to do with landscapes for a long time, is paint the essence of nature. And in terms of my cultural background, being Native American and African American, it's involved with the uniquity of the beauty of the combined elements, and how much this is involved with spiritual sensitivity, which I learned a lot from Norman Lewis. He was involved with internalized creative expression, and he called it gut painting. All right, in terms of a particular feeling that one would have about a subject. How do you paint love? What does it look like? What color is it? What shape is it? If you're going to paint fear, how do you do that? What color is that? What is fear? Someone said, well, I'd paint it blue or gray or something like that. Would be a fearful kind of non-subject structure. And love, what would love feel like? How would you paint an embrace? What is it? What is it? So this is what I've been rattling for years in terms of painting the essence of life and in nature, and using nature as a metaphor to express feeling.
So, Richard, I have a question for you from Peter Wayne Lewis. Hi, Peter. I am a Mass Art alumni, so it's nice to see you on here. He says, in 2000, Rick was my guest lecturer at Massachusetts College of Art and Design and gave the Adderley Lecture. The lecture is available on the college website. At that time, Rick sang scat and did a tap dance. Can you talk about the jazz and the American experience? That's amazing. Now I'm going to go and watch the tap dance.
Well, I never wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be an entertainer. In fact, I sang publicly for about 3 or 4 years, but I rushed back to my studio for safety. Really, it was a protective area to function in. But I always wanted to be an actor. And then I used to watch the people on the street in terms of how they moved. And I met the mime teacher of France, and he was involved with how gesture is part of excellent communication, and how one, in terms of one's movement or hand movement, is suggestive of how they think and how they feel. So I said, oh, wow. So there was that sensitivity of knowing just in terms of the body gesture or movement. So I was caught between, in terms of being an actor, I was watching all the actors, how much they learn mime in terms of movement other than just the word. Or like what Ina did in terms of creates an environment of illusion. I remember Ina had a set designed there, and a chair was in a particular place. When she moved the chair to another space, the whole space changed. So there's just a simplicity of gestural movement, of illusion. And when I studied in Europe, all I studied was two-dimensional design, two-dimensional illusion, and how the eye sees two-dimensionally, and not three-dimensionally, but two-dimensionally. And then how much one seems seeing color two-dimensionally advances on the eye, and one color recedes, and shapes also do the same thing. That was the whole basic of two-dimensional design structure of painting in Europe. And I try to use that sometimes in painting, but you get caught up in the structural concept instead of the sensitive, the emotional illusion. So I get lost between the concept and the consciousness and the visual interpretation.
There is another question that's for you, Richard. It must be gratifying as an artist and a parent to see your children collaborating so beautifully with their work. Do you ever weigh in on their conversations?
Well, there's some influence in them, and they don't do it in terms of the conversation. They do it in gesture. They do it in what they accomplish. And so as a conversation sometimes, that gets lost in the rhetoric. They get lost in the rhetoric rather than just the physical illusion. All right. So there's a problem in that area. I was so influenced by the fact that how talented they are. Where did they come from? They said, well, not too far from a tree, that something falls in terms of one's children's heritage. I'm sorry, they have gone far beyond anything that I have ever done. This is what I feel. And how much what influence, I'm more influenced by them, the fact that how inventive, how creative they are. it's mind-boggling beyond anything in terms of the well, like maybe associated with teaching. I think my teaching was much stronger than what happens in terms of my accomplishment with my paintings. I feel that my teaching has reached another level beyond I even was aware of or whatever I ever learned. So I'm so influenced by the fact that their applied existence, which is endless. And it's hard for me to think about my paintings, which is no painting is ever finished, no music composition is ever ending, and no write and listening from Toni Morrison, no book she wrote only stimulates the continuation of that into another book. So I feel that what the future of theater design and also graphic design, and they're in complete control of it. I'm 97 years old, so I don't know if I'll ever see where they're going to take this another 10 years from now, because they're the inspiring sensitivity of whoever comes behind them would pick up on the development of that concept.
I say without him necessarily commenting on, I don't know if you agree, on a specific thing, it's okay not to know. It's going to be good, and the way he paints, there's not a plan, except there's a view, and that I think rings through for me. And I think between Ina and I, we are speaking in tongues sometimes, but it'll be something like that. And that is, I think he moves like that. Mom did too.
Yeah, there isn't like specific conversation. It's kind of, we just kind of talk about the ideas around it rather than the end result. Or I think a lot of our conversations are more abstract and conceptual, and that's all that we really need, because that's encouraging enough, to know that someone believes in you, that you're going to complete whatever project you're going to do. And that's what I think, that's kind of how we talk about things, like, oh yeah, I'm working on this. And then we have a bigger conversation than just the project itself, amongst everything, because it really always comes down to, like he's saying, emotions and feelings and overall influences, and not to use conceptual too much, but that really kind of what it is. We maybe talk around things rather than talk specifically.
Yeah.
Well, and what makes it, what do we have to do to make it clear, which involves a billion different touch points, whether it's corporate side or visual, or whether it's your emotion or the audiences or the customers, what's clear for them. And I think then you're successful, which is tricky.
I want to say thank you to each of you. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation. It's been amazing working with you and hearing about your experiences. I just want to thank you all for your work that you've also done with Purchase College at some point in time, or how Purchase College has influenced you. Thank you, Ina, Scott, and Richard, for contributing to this wonderful conversation today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to our audience for coming on and listening in. Please feel free to email me at nma.education@purchase.edu if you have any further questions. I'm more than happy to answer them for you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.
Take care.
I'm
Bye.
humbled by the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Richard. It's been so wonderful hearing your experiences, and also you're super inspiring to me as an educator. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.